Good evening, folks. We're just going to give everybody a minute to filter into their virtual seats and we'll get started shortly. So it looks like there's still a few more folks trickling in, so we'll just give them a minute to get their audio set up and we'll get started. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Provincial Fisheries and Sport Fishing Update webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Janine Higgins, and I'll be your facilitator for our session. So before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that I am speaking to you tonight from the traditional territory of Treaty 6. Now, as we are coming together online and also covering topics from across the territories and homelands of many Indigenous peoples, I'd like to acknowledge all treaties in the province, as all of Alberta is treaty land. And I'd also like to acknowledge the long history and deep connections that First Nations and Métis people have with this land. I honor this today in hopes of working together in a good way and as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on. So here is our agenda for our session tonight. So I'll be taking us through a welcome to get us set up for this evening. And then we'll be moving into our presentation on our provincial fisheries and sport fishing update. After that, we will move into our question and answer session before the meeting closes tonight at 8:30. So for our question and answer section, we did want to go through some of the how-tos in case you haven't been with us before. This is our third session of our sport fishing engagement times in January here, but just wanted to provide an update on how this will work for this evening. So depending on how you're joining, if you are calling in from a computer or an app on your phone or potentially a tablet, this Q&A button may be hiding, so you might have to have a look around for it. It could be as an option or on your screen somewhere else, but once you open it up, that's where you'll be able to type questions in for tonight. Now, if you are joining us from a computer, there is actually a way to sort the questions. So it's up to you for how you'd like to do this. You can view the most recent questions that have been submitted or the most upvoted. Now, for tonight, we are going to be using that upvoting tool to be able to help us prioritize the questions that we're going to be responding to. So if you see a question that you'd like to hear answered tonight, please go ahead and click that upvote button. And as I mentioned, that's one of the ways that we'll be sorting the questions. So we do recognize we have a lot of people online with us tonight, and we likely won't be able to get through everybody's questions. However, we do appreciate all questions on our topics that we'll be covering for this evening. So in terms of how we'll be managing our Q&A tool, of course, anything that's inappropriate will just be deleted. I'm sure that won't be a problem for tonight, folks, but please do keep it clean. We're also going to be trying to group questions together or potentially dismiss them if we've already spoken to them in another question so that we can answer as many questions tonight as possible. And we're going to be starting our session by responding to some of the pre-submitted questions that you put in when you registered for the event through Zoom. So if we don't get to your question tonight, don't worry, there's still other opportunities for you to be able to connect with our staff and get a response to your question. And we'll provide some more options for that at the end of the session, or you can always go to our engagement webpage that you can see online. So in terms of who you'll see here tonight, our lead presenter is Shane Petrie. He's our fisheries policy manager. So you'll be hearing from him shortly here. And then once we move into the question and answer, we have a bunch of experts here who are going to be providing responses. So we've got Michael Sullivan, who is our provincial fish science specialist, Bill Patterson, our provincial fish allocation and use specialist, and Laura McPherson, who is our provincial fish stock assessment specialist. Craig Copeland is here as well. He's our fish culture manager, and Stuart Nadeau, who's our fisheries manager for the South region. And then we've got Paul Christensen and Jason Cooper here as our senior fish bios. So you'll also see some other friendly faces here who are going to be working away with me in the background. So a big thanks to my colleagues, Alyssa Robb, Jenna Curtis, and Natalie Olson, who are going to be making sure that things run smooth for us technically and that we don't have any issues. So if we do happen to have any issues tonight, we do also have Dave Park, who's here in the background. You won't see him on your screen or in the panel, but he's our backup presenter for tonight in case anything happens with Shane. But knock on wood, we should have no problems for tonight. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Shane to take us through our presentation.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Janine.
No problem.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Of course, as Janine mentioned, I'm the provincial manager for fisheries policy. Welcome to our third and final webinar in this series of fisheries engagements. We're doing things a little bit differently this year in that we had fewer angling regulations proposed, so we thought we would host a provincial updates webinar to kind of bring back some of the things that we consulted previously on and give some updates. So that's largely what tonight's session is about. Janine mentioned this, but we our panelists and some of our behind the scenes support folks are coming to you from all over Alberta. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of Treaty 7 down in southern Alberta. And before we move forward, and I think as we move into things, we'll see here. For tonight, we're going to talk, give you some updates on the walleye stalking program. We're going to talk about our ongoing assessment of harvest slot limits as a regulatory tool. A relatively small update to competitive fishing events in Alberta. A proposal that we have for an angling guide license in Alberta. Another project that we have, which is an electronic tag, which is an interesting project for tagging walleye that within a special harvest license. And then the last item for this evening is a consultation item that some proposed approaches that we have to protect fish during periods of low flows, high temperatures, and angling. So we'll start off with walleye stalking. Some of you may recall our engagement on walleye stalking actually goes back to probably a number of years, but certainly to the last face-to-face engagement that we had in Alberta, where we traveled across Alberta and we talked about things like walleye stalking. This would have been just prior to COVID pandemic in January of 2020. Given the pandemic, we weren't able to implement a stalking program back then. Although in 2021, we were able to bring that program on board. There's a couple of, I think, pretty significant things to consider when bringing back a walleye stalking program, and one significant one is that historically we wouldn't have, anytime we stalked walleye as part of a program, it was really or primarily to establish self-sustaining walleye populations in various water bodies in the province for angling, harvest, and harvest opportunities. But it was really to get those stocks to a self-sustaining place. Whereas now those objectives have kind of changed. They're much more angler driven. We're looking very specifically at options around put, grow, and take harvest for walleye. Supplementing existing stocked walleye populations that could also create harvest or other angling opportunities. So it is a bit of a shift in thinking of the objectives, which is great. And those are some of the things that we took from some of the engagements that we had in 2020 and 2021. I think that another thing is that Alberta really hadn't had any significant walleye stocking efforts going on for decades, and so it's kind of new business to us, and we, it's a significant effort to go out and you can see in the photograph there, collect eggs from, and this is right when the ice is off the lake in the springtime, collect eggs and milt, and then fertilize those eggs and bring them to our hatchery. So our fisheries management and fish culture staff, it was a significant project, and they did a great job at it. So what did we do in 2021? We went to Lac Saint Anne and we collected gametes or eggs and milt. We fertilized those eggs. We brought them to our fish hatchery in Cold Lake. We hatched them out, and some of them, within a short period of time, fry. You can see which are very tiny, kind of eyelash-sized walleye, and some we grew out to fingerlings, and then we stocked them into 12 or 10 water bodies last year. So that was about, I think, combined about 3.5 million walleye. So you can certainly see that we stocked those out and primarily in reservoirs and in places in the south. And we expect to see some of those harvest opportunities in 4 to 5 years, although we certainly, in the south, you may see some things a little sooner. We do have a little bit extra growing period sometimes. So that was our activities for 2021, and it was really just to kind of, in the bigger concept, bring the program back, understand what it takes in the fish culture system, understand what it takes to gather what we need, and run a successful stocking program. Moving forward, we'll continue the program, and we'll go out again this year and collect eggs and milt. We'll look at stocking the same 10 water bodies. I would suspect questions that are floating around would be why are we only looking in the southern part of the province in reservoirs? I think we are looking at additional water bodies in other parts of the province, but some of the considerations that we have there are that there are native walleye populations that exist in many of the central and northern parts of the province, and we don't want to mix those genetics with genetics of other fish. So we're in discussions right now with our fish culture staff to see if we can bring in multiple sources and keep them isolated in the hatchery, and if there's opportunity to stock those out in other parts of the province. So we are considering some other things, and as we go through that planning, we'll let people know a little bit more closely what types of things and water bodies that we're thinking about. So moving on from that into our assessment of the harvest slot limits. So some folks may remember in 2020 we introduced harvest slot limits at about 50 different fisheries in Alberta as a pilot project. A proportion of those water bodies we are selecting to assess, as a regulation tool for fisheries manager. It's a 5-year kind of assessment, and it's really looking at angler effort. We've collected data in 2020, and we've collected it again in 2021. And really, the questions that we're trying to answer with looking at harvest slots as an option is, do anglers select harvest slot lakes, so lakes with a harvest on them, over other types of fisheries? So that would be fisheries with catch and release regulations, fisheries with special harvest licenses, those sorts of things. So are we changing our behavior, and do people desire those? Another question is, at what level of effort in harvest do we start to see issues or declines in populations of walleye and or other fish if we put on a slot? And then lastly, as we would look to see under what circumstances a harvest slot might be able to be used in as a tool in fisheries management. Summarizing some of the information, 2020 was an interesting year. We saw a great deal of angling effort, about 67% more than what we would expect as part of the long-term trend for angling in Alberta. We really suspect this is as a result of the pandemic, and correspondingly, we sold more licenses as well. Our license sales were up about 30%, but angling was up very significantly. In 2020, we observed about close to 200,000 anglers, and they put in about 500,000 hours of angling effort at about 17 fisheries in 2020. One of the things that we've seen from the data in 2020 is that lakes with harvest slot limit regulations didn't attract greater numbers of anglers than lakes with other regulations such as catch and release or special harvest licenses. So as we moved forward into 2021, of course, this is now year 2. We've just kind of finished pulling our data together and starting to think about the data from this past year. And one of the things we did see is we saw the number of anglers return back to what we would expect relative to our long-term angling effort trends. We figure, more our suspicion is that the COVID effect is declining and brings us back into what we would expect to see. We did see about I think about 115,000 anglers and about 320,000 angler hours. So at 13 different fisheries. So that's a significant drop from the 2020 information where we saw a couple of 100,000 anglers at close to around 500,000 angler hours. And then we also saw license sales in 2021 decline back into the 5-year average for angling license sales in Alberta. Similarly, as in 2020, harvest slot lakes in 2021 did not appear to attract more anglers than other lakes with catch and release or special harvest regulations at them. Although we did start to see and look at, at what rate or at what level of effort, would we start to see walleye populations be impacted at slot limit lakes. Some of our initial monitoring shows us that basically in some lakes, we've seen declines of walleye populations up to 50% at 13 different slot lakes. Whereas walleye populations remained relatively stable at some special harvest lakes. Now, I mean, we have to take this data for what they are. They're early in our assessment of harvest slots as a tool. So we'll continue to monitor this as we've said. It's it's scheduled to be a 5-year program right now, which is 2020 to 2024. And so we've just completed those 2 years, and we will commit. One of the important things here is that we have full intention of posting our reports. We're in the late stages of the 2020 report and hopefully getting that up online soon. And we'll be in a similar place with the report, our assessment report for harvest slots for 2021 very soon as well. So there's more to come on that, and as we start to release information, you'll see that stuff being put out there so that you can access those reports and have a look yourself. There's competitive fishing in Alberta. This is a fairly straightforward, hopefully, update here. We're proposing to make a few changes to the legislation to close what is a regulatory loophole, and at the same in the same effort, we figure we'll take this opportunity to maybe do some modernizing of our regulatory processes for competitive fishing in Alberta, simplifying rules and processes. So we have proposed some changes there to the legislation, because the loophole that I referred to is one that where if organizers for competitive fishing ran events simultaneously on multiple water bodies, there was not a requirement for a license. So our proposed change is simply that, generally speaking, in 2022, any organized competitive fishing events with greater than 25 participants will at specific waters will require licensing. So it's a small change, but an important one. And of course, as I mentioned, while we were doing this, we felt it would be important and helpful. And I think organizers and folks participating in events will like this. We're coming up with online applications, reporting forms, and everybody can take a sigh of relief with the paper check payment system that we've been running. We're doing our best to move to an online credit card payment system, which will greatly improve the administration and the regulatory processes. And then we obviously we need to have a look at the rules and make sure things are consistent as needed for like events across Alberta. So small update there on competitive fishing. And for 2022, that's currently proposed. A new license that we've proposed for Alberta is an angling guide license. Basically, when we look at our fisheries and we look at how we manage them for conservation, Indigenous, recreational, commercial uses, an angling guide license kind of falls certainly within those objectives and supports those types of management objectives. Our initial approach to creating a guide license is not intended at this point, or our proposed approach is really not to create a fulsome set of requirements and operating standards for the angling guide industry. Right now, we're really looking at creating accessible, affordable, and easily obtained licenses. We will require specific reporting, however, and that will really be the meat of allowing fishery managers to better understand guiding activities in the province. So reporting activities will be, guiding days, where did you guide water bodies, what did you catch, anything kept or released. So there will be some relatively straightforward but very important reporting required that will allow us to characterize what's going on in Alberta with the guiding activities. We also contemplated, we didn't want to add a bunch of additional hurdles to folks in the initial approach before we better understood what was going on in the province. And as we move through this, we certainly will continue to seek input and advice from stakeholders and the guiding community to make sure that as we move forward in the licensing and the regulatory process for guiding, things make sense. So as I mentioned, our initial proposal is fairly straightforward. We would intend for licenses to be issued through the realm system, so the recreational licensing system that we currently have for angling and hunting. We estimate, it hasn't been finalized, but we estimate costs to be between $50 and $100. It will follow a sport fishing license cycle, so that would be April 1 to March 31 of the following year. And as I mentioned, an important aspect of it is some of the annual reporting of guiding activities, so that those will have to be input into the system prior to the system allowing you to renew your license. We expect to see something, or we hope to, the proposal is for this April. So stay tuned to My Wild Alberta for additional information on angling guide licenses. Another project that we have ongoing is an electronic tagging pilot for special harvest licenses for walleye. Some folks may remember, and this again goes back to really the 2020 face-to-face. I recall having many conversations about issues with some of the tags, the paper tags used for tagging walleye in the SHL system, the special harvest licenses. And there was really, I didn't realize it because I hadn't heard that much feedback up until then, how problematic those tags were. So we've heard that over the last couple of years, and we looked at various options, and one of them was an electronic tagging system. And so we're going to pilot something this year, which is essentially a way for anglers to tag a walleye with an electronic tag. It will be available in Realm. It won't change in the draw process. The only thing that will change is, instead of linking a tag number to a license, you will choose an electronic tag or a paper tag. The paper tags will still be available, but when you go to purchase your special harvest licenses, if you are a successful draw applicant, you'll be able to select whether you want to choose an electronic tag or whether you'd like to go with the paper tag. And so that's going to be an exciting thing, and we're looking forward to implementing this. And you know, one of the questions is how will it work? You know, how will an e-tag work? Well, essentially, it will work through the Realm application on your mobile device. You'll be able to go into your account and electronically tag your fish with your mobile through the application on your mobile device. Now, you know, that will be your declaration of harvesting that walleye under the conditions of that license. And you know, I mean, there are things that we consider. You know, I mean, what if anglers are out on a water body, they don't have cell phone service? What if they arrive back at the dock and one of our Fish and Wildlife officers are there or something? I think the simple thing is once you tag that fish, it will be recorded in the app. And as soon as you get back into service, you'll see that will automatically send that information. And if somebody was checked, they would be able to, an officer would be able to see that fish was tagged in that app. So that's an exciting pilot that we're looking forward to this year. While I'm talking about special harvest licenses and the electronic tag pilot, I also wanted to just remind everyone that this year, Class C walleye tags under the special harvest license will be purchased just over the counter. So that will be on a first come, first serve sort of thing for this year, which is a change so from it being on a draw. And then also don't forget to look for those undersubscribed walleye tags after the draws. And obviously this is a similar purchase as anybody would do for an undersubscribed hunting license if you're a hunter, but keep your eyes open there. And as more information becomes available, again, we'll use sites like My Wild Alberta and other ways to make sure that people are informed around the launch of the electronic tag system. Now, the last item that we have today is a consultation item, and this is Alberta's approach here to, you know, some proposals to protecting fish during low flows and high temperature periods. You know, we've received a lot of feedback on this, and we know there's concern. Southern Alberta, you know, experiences, you know, what's now really chronic periods of high temperatures with little precipitation. Obviously, those things result in decreases to stream flows and increases to water temperatures. I think that when you combine those things with, you know, the low flow, high temperatures, and high angling effort, obviously fish can sustain, you know, periods of stress, which lead basically to hooking and handling mortality in those populations. So we've come up with a tool, you know, which is a time of day closure tool to try and address some of the angler related stress on fish when we have low flows and hot weather. An important aspect of this as a tool and is that it's really it's an attempt to shift and change angler effort. Angler effort is really, you know, the way that we, you know, and this doesn't matter which jurisdiction you're in or where you're doing this, whether Montana, Oregon, British Columbia, wherever. It is premised on changing angler effort and reducing that effort, thus and thereby reducing hooking mortality, handling mortality, those sorts of things. So that's the premise of the tool and the what. But there are always uncertainties when you have this, right? And those uncertainties in this case obviously relate to if we have time of day closures, do we shift effort to other sensitive areas where they cause similar issues, or do we shift behavior such that anglers now, okay, there's a period of closure, so all of, you know, most or all of the anglers shift their angling to the open periods. If those things happen, those create an uncertainty relative to our ability to reduce that angling effort overall and protect fish. So that's something we're very conscious about, and as we move forward into providing options for this. And in the survey, I'm sure most on the call have seen the survey and or participated in the survey. And really, we've offered 3 options. One is the time of day closure with a fixed period, and all of the options really relate to Bow River and portions of VS1, although could be others. And it would be, waters would be closed to angling daily between 2 p.m. and 12 a.m. between July 1st and August 31st, which are the months in which the highest angling pressure occurs. And so every year on July 1st in this auction to August 31st, every day it's closed, and that's the end of the story. It becomes just an annual regulation. In the second option, which is the time of day closure with a semi-fixed period, so same kind of description of what's going on and the timing of the closures. However, there is potential to monitor flows and at appropriate intervals and get a better understanding of what we might predict to see for the remainder of the season, and then potentially open the fishery using a variation order during the season. So this one is semi-fixed. One of the things that is important to note here is that if we did open the season, if we looked at things and we expected, flows had been up, temperatures been down, we expect precipitation, but that did not happen, the fishery would not be reclosed after an in-season opening in this option. And then the last option in this one is relates to just status quo. So this is, every year we issue angling advisories. Last year we did a very thorough job with angling advisories beginning in about middle of June and ongoing right up through August and into September, where we started issuing advisories. We started offering best management practices, requesting people redirect their angling efforts to other lower impact fisheries, stocks fisheries, or other places where we didn't see some of those issues. So that's just that's a status quo, and it's a voluntary, not a regulatory based option. I think a couple of things that with the low flows and option that I want to bring up is that there's really 3 things. I think one is that there might be some folks wondering out there is why are we not doing this on a more intensive at a more intensive scale? Why are we not looking at flows weekly or bi-weekly and making regulatory changes on a much more frequent basis? I think the answer to that is that there are many things that go on to open and close fisheries. It's extremely resource intensive for the biologists and for our enforcement officers, and it creates uncertainty. It creates around enforcement issues. There are lots of communication obligations in briefing, and we can't forget that there is a regulatory process that must be followed. Each time you open or close a fishery, it's done by writing a variation order, getting those variation orders signed, and then you have to rescind those variation orders. So it is a pretty intensive process to undertake if we were to look at things on a much more frequent basis. And I'm just and I'm not sure that that doing that we'd be able to do that. The other thing I want to speak to a little bit here about the low flow and high temperatures and angling approaches is that it's really about the tool. I know that our objective here is to protect cold water fish, right? We're really talking about trout, primarily in the Bow River and eastern slopes areas. But the tool of a time of day closure and it's scalable. You can implement it in a fishery management zone. You can implement it on a stream in a watershed. There are lots of ways you can use it as a tool. And I think that's where the focus should be. I think we've talked about the Bow River, we've talked about portions of ES1, but it's really focused on protecting cold water fish where it makes sense and where we see chronic issues around low flows, high temperature thresholds, combined with angling. So we can certainly, as we look at this and when we get down into looking at specific areas and things like that, portions of ES1, maybe walleye fisheries or something like that, and that would be outside of what we would, maybe outside of where we might close some things. But I want the focus to be on the tool and using the tool in a smart way that makes sense. And then And then lastly, I would say that Alberta Fisheries Management always has the discretionary ability to close any fisheries. If we see that there are imminent issues or issues occurring relative to fish mortalities, we would take the appropriate steps at that time to make sure that those fisheries were protected. And certainly we have the ability to do that within our regulatory framework. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to bring up in addition to just providing some clarification around how and what we've proposed and the tool for addressing stress to fish during periods of low flow, high temperature, and high angling effort. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for listening to the talk tonight. I want to remind folks that please complete your surveys. I think that, over the last 3 years, Fisheries in Alberta has undertaken really provincial scale engagements, with 2020 being a face-to-face, 2021 being quite a number of series of webinars, and really trying to get information and talking to Albertans about their opinions and advice on the types of fisheries they'd like to see in the province. Last year alone, we heard from over 2,500 people in the survey. We received a very wide diversity of views on fisheries and on the types of fisheries and the types of fisheries programs folks would like to see in the province. And those things, they were heard. Last year we made regulation changes to 32 different water bodies. We made some changes to the walleye harvest license, special harvest licensing system, and other things. Beyond that, the slot harvest lakes. That's a direct result of what Albertans wanted to see, and assessing that as a regulation. The walleye stalking program, again, a direct result of the feedback that we get from Albertans. We've seen increases and diversification to our stocked fisheries, and we've seen, commitments for improvements and improvements ongoing to our provincial fish hatcheries that to support those other objectives. And then again, this year we're looking at, our engagements being able to drive changes at quite a number of water bodies in Alberta relative to angling regulations. So completing surveys is an important thing, and it helps us understand what people want to see on the landscape. So again, thanks to everybody for participating this evening. We certainly appreciate it. We're going to move into the question period here in a moment. But I just want to also mention, as similar as we did last year, we'll be sharing the survey feedback that we received, so there's transparency in the process. And so you can look to see those reports on the engagement webpage prior to the release of the sport fishing regulations. Thanks again, everyone. I appreciate your time this evening.
Excellent. Thank you, Shane, so much for that presentation. So we will move into our question and answer session now. And so I'll just invite the panel to rejoin us here. So if you can just turn your videos back on, panelists, and we'll get ready to get started. So I do see there's lots of folks who have put in questions this evening, which is fantastic. And people are using the upvoting tool as well. So thank you very much for actively participating in that. So as I mentioned, we are going to be starting off with some pre-submitted questions. However, we have also received some questions that are along the same themes as to what we had picked out. So I'll read some pre-submitted questions and also some live questions. And then for our panelists, just a reminder, if you can just remind us of who you are and what your position is the first time that you're responding to a question, just so that everybody knows who you are. And then, of course, we've got a couple of folks working in the background, as mentioned, to make sure that we run smoothly. So Alyssa, Jenna, and Natalie won't have their videos on. So with that, let's get started. So one of the pre-submitted questions that we had was from Christopher, who is wondering, what is the status of fish hatcheries currently, and what are the plans for more? And there was also a question that was submitted live tonight from Ian, who is saying, Craig Copeland, can you confirm if the trout in the Cold Lake hatchery and Cold Lake have infection, pancreatic necrosis, and such cannot be hatched for other lakes?
Well, that's pretty good, Janine. You did a good job on IPN. Yeah, Craig Copeland, Fish Culture Manager. Thanks for the questions. I'll talk about the future for fish culture. We are in the process of building the first brand new fish hatchery in the province since 1986. So it's pretty exciting. We've gone out for a consultant, hired the consultant, engineer consultant. We hope to go to tender this summer for the brand new facility at Raven out by Caroline. What that'll allow us to do is we're going to have about 4 separate brood rooms, adult brood rooms, that we can continue with our rainbow trout program, but also allow the biologists some options for, say, another species, say bull trout, grayling, or cutthroat trout strain. So we're going to really expand that ability for them, give them more tools to work with. And we're also going to increase the amount of fish that we can raise for stocking. So it's going to be about a 13,000 kilo increase in fish production, which, we raise about 110,000 kilos of fish a year for the Alberta lakes. So it's going to be a little bit of lift, 12-13% increase or so. So that's pretty exciting. So, we haven't, in the 1970s and early 80s, we built the Sam Livingston Fish Hatchery out of Calgary, the Allison Creek Fish Hatchery out of Crow's Nest Pass, and then the Cold Lake Fish Hatchery in 86. So, the province has 4 hatcheries, and we have the ability to, produce rainbow trout, brook trout, brown trout, tiger trout, and cutthroat trout. And we also bring in a rainbow trout eggs from the private sector. So it's pretty exciting for us. The province over the past few years has really invested in the fish hatcheries. So Sam Livingston and Allison Creek both have brand new reuse systems. Basically replacing the plumbing inside our facilities with modern technologies. And we're right now out for tender on the Cold Lake Fish Hatchery, where the Cold Lake Fish Hatchery is a flow-through system, and we're going to put in a reuse system so that we recapture all that heat that goes out back to Cold Lake. So that one hopefully will go out for construction right away. In terms of IPN, great question. IPN is led in the early 90s, late 80s. That led to actually the ozone plant at the Cold Lake Fish Hatchery. So Cold Lake itself has a fish virus called infectious pancreatic necrosis, IPN, and it's a federal recognized disease. If your fish come down with it, you've got to destroy all your fish. You can't stock them out, and you have to disinfect your hatchery. So unfortunately, Cold Lake was built the hatchery is built on a lake that has the virus. There's only a few lakes in Alberta that actually have IPN, and Cold Lake was one of them. But we have ozone technology. So ozone, we bring in 300 liters per second of water from the lake itself, and we treat all that water with ozone, kills everything in the water. And so in terms of could we raise Cold Lake lake trout? No. The problem is that you would be bringing in the virus into your hatchery. And so if the biologists ever wanted to get back into the lake trout program, you're going to have to find a lake in Alberta that doesn't have IPN, which is going to be pretty tough. There's very few lakes in Alberta with a lake trout population that's pure, that doesn't have the IPN virus. Hope that helps, Janine.
Great, thank you, Craig. All right, so next up, we had a couple of pre-submitted questions just around the consultation item that Shane spoke about last. So the first one comes from Brent. Why is there no opportunity to reclose for the semi-fixed option? Reopening and being stuck with that decision seems short-sighted. And another one from Trevor saying, instead of having one decision model, option 1 or 2, why not have more frequent decisions based on water temperature and flow levels?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and it's a really excellent question. And you might be thinking, do these people not know how to monitor temperature and flow, and then can't just adjust condition or adjust regulations as the conditions would suggest? I think Shane started to touch on our reasons a little bit easier. The data collection is actually the really easy part for us now. We learned a lot after we did our initial full closure of the Bow River in 2015. Some of you might have seen us out pounding signs, and we were taking water temperatures. And we did happen to have digital data that we were able to get flow conditions from. The challenge with that is it's extremely laborious, and it's not something where we can respond very quickly at all. So we kind of scratched our heads and got together, and we developed a system where we were able to look at air temperatures, and we're able to correlate air temperatures to water temperatures, and then align those with some of our gauging stations. So using the criteria of 20 degrees Celsius and flows below the lowest quartile, we were able to develop a dashboard that in a very, very timely and quick way, we could just run a quick analysis and see at the scale of several streams what those conditions look like. That's the really easy part. It's not a matter of me emailing headquarters and saying, okay, send out an email and it's closed now. Shane alluded to the fact that this is in fact a regulatory change. So that's something that's legislative, and there's a lot more steps that are involved with changing legislation or changing regulations within season. There's a reason that we don't adjust our regulations all of the time. We tend to do it once a year. The low flow guidelines are a circumstance where we're trying to make adjustments for in-season conditions, but the reality of our regulatory system is, in order to do that, there are multiple briefings, signatures, approvals required at various levels, dictated by the legislation that make us do that. Once those decisions are signed off, they are then disseminated down to enforcement folks to make sure that they understand what the regulations are, so that we don't inadvertently end up charging some folks. So it may seem like a very straightforward answer, where at the turn of a switch we can just turn this on and off, but it's actually a days-long process in order to open or close a fishery. It's a lot easier to open a fishery. The consequences of telling people you can go fishing are obviously going to be a lot less significant than us going out and inadvertently laying charges or tickets to people that are not following the rules. So I did see it in one of the comments below. We can appreciate the fact that there's other jurisdictions that are able to do this, and what I don't think we can say is what the mechanisms or intricacies of their legislation are that would allow them to do that. The way Alberta's legislation is structured, we have to follow a very specific process, and that is in fact quite time consuming. So what we tried to land on was some options that gave us the ability to try to protect some low flow high temp conditions early in the season. It may seem a little irrational why we chose July 1st, but if you start looking at a lot of the hydrographs related to irrigation, when it gets really hot in Alberta, it's not quite as much August where the irrigators are diverting water at that point, because they're really needing to irrigate their crops in June and July. So that's when their heavy demand for water is. So subsequently, they tend to maximize the diversion volumes, and that can help. That can be a factor that changes flows as well. So one of the reasons that we did this is, a lot of people have been noticing that the water temperatures and flows have been changing a lot over the last few years, and we've seen that in 6 of the last 7 years. We have periods of a week or more in July and August in 6 to 7 years where this occurs, and in 5 to 7 of those years it's for 2 weeks and longer. And unfortunately, according to the analysis that we looked at, there was no clear period where we looked at it and said, hey, this 1 week in July is the week where it happens. It was actually all over the place. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background and understanding as to why this is not quite as simple as it might seem. Thanks for the question.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. All right, so next up we have a bunch of questions about trout fisheries. So I'll read them out. We had 2 pre-submitted and 1 come in live tonight from Mike. So in the pre-submitted questions, one from Maria: can we stop stocking water bodies to only have them completely harvested in a year or 2? And another from Brad: what is the rationale for having a minimum size limit on all put and take trout ponds? It's a shame to see 6 to 9 inch trout harvested. And then our question that came in live from Mike is saying, since our trout fisheries take pressure off our walleye and pike fisheries, especially our quality trout lakes, and since these quality trout lakes are seeing more and more traffic and interest from anglers, why is the government as a whole spending less resources and attention on our trout fisheries? It would make sense to increase studies and pay more attention to increasing the quality of our trout fisheries to ensure more of these lakes offer better fishing opportunities, relieving even more pressure off of our walleye and pike fisheries.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. I can take those questions. Hi, folks. I'm Jason Cooper, Senior Fisheries Biologist in Red Deer, and also acting as the Senior Fisheries Biologist for Lethbridge as well for the interns. So yeah, those are great questions, and certainly reference Alberta's recreational trout stocking program. So this program, through annual stocking of trout, creates significant additional angling opportunities throughout the province, and especially in areas where there's less or more limited chances to actually get out and go fish. So, examples, out in the eastern portions of the province in that parkland and prairies area. And, these stocked fisheries, as Mike alluded to there in his question, also help reduce angling effort and associated angling mortality and harvest on, both on those walleye and pike fisheries, but also on our native trout streams and rivers throughout the province as well. So at a higher level, for the most part, the overall objective of the recreational trout stocking program is to provide for put and take harvest of trout. These trout are stocked each spring and provide angling and harvest opportunities throughout the season, and then more trout are stocked the next spring, and the cycle repeats itself. The majority of those newly stocked trout are already at catchable size in that 20 centimeters or 8-inch size range. So along with that default 5 trout daily limit, these provide essentially immediate harvest opportunities, and is not meant, it's important to say, it's not meant to support a more sustainable or higher quality type stocked fisheries. Also noting, I've actually had a similar question come in that actually some anglers don't even know that these trout actually don't reproduce in these water bodies. They make that assumption that they can reproduce. They can't. So we have to continue to stock these water bodies in order for trout to persist there. And then also important to note is not all these water bodies that we stock annually across the province support overwinter survival, and in even some experience some summer kills, especially in some more severe and hot summers. So those are key pieces to take into account as well. So if we were to implement, let's say, a minimum size limit, 30 centimeters or even larger, broadly across all these stock trout water bodies in the province, trout actually may not be able to actually get large enough in that season to actually be harvested. So that's some of the rationale as to why a minimum size limit isn't put on all put and take trout water bodies. However, I need to point out that not all of our stock trout water bodies are managed this way in the province as put and take fisheries. Over the last number of years, fishery staff, through engagement and consultation, have expanded on the trout stocking program, and we've been hearing that. Certainly in 2020, in January, did those face-to-face. We talked about diversifying a number of our stocking opportunities and looking to create higher quality stock trout fisheries. And that's what we've been hearing from anglers, and then that's what Mike's question there also alluded to as well. So what do I mean by more diverse opportunities? Basically, it's just stocking more than one trout species. So generally, that was always rainbow trout. Now we have water bodies that are stocked with multiple trout species. So in addition to rainbow trout, there might be brown trout or brook trout, or even the new popular tiger trout are being stocked in a number of locations and providing diversity for angling opportunities. And then when we talk about those higher quality stocked fisheries, those are water bodies that do actually have more restrictive regulations, so reduced harvest numbers. So maybe it's only a 1 or 2 fish limit. Maybe there is a minimum size limit, and in some cases we actually make them catch and release, and we actually have bait bans and seasonal closures, all in an effort to minimize that mortality, to support a more unique fishing opportunity for anglers to catch larger trophy-sized trout. So in summary, yes, the concern of stocking water bodies, to only have them completely harvested out and to see those small-sized fish being harvested are certainly valid, depending on the type of trout fishing experience that you're looking for. Certainly very valid concerns for some of our other species like pike and walleye, where we are trying to maintain sustainable numbers. That's very critical. But it's important to consider that main objective of the trout program being put and take, and noting some of those limitations. So hope that answers the question. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. All right, next up, we have a whole bunch of questions about the guide licensing. So what I'll do is I'll read them all out. I think there's 6 or 7 questions here, and then I'll open it up to the panel to respond. So bear with me while I read them. So first question comes from Ken. What use will be made of the new guide license fee? Next is from Brent. Are there restrictions to the angling guide license eligibility, such as non-resident Canadians or non-resident aliens? Will there be compliance implications of not having an angling guide license? And then another question from Shay, wondering if the guide licenses also have to purchase a standard sport fishing license, or if the guide license covers you also for personal sport fishing. Question from Ken, will fishing guides be required to produce the proper insurance to obtain the license, such as liability? And will the number of guide licenses sold be made public? Comes from Peter. And last one from Mike, would the guide license apply to fishing schools and clinics, as these are usually there's include water instruction and catching?
So how about I take a crack at those, Janine, at least to start off, and I'll invite the panel to jump in wherever they feel that they want to have comment. So Ken, thanks for the question. What use will be made of the guide license fees? It's a small amount of money. There'd be obviously an administrative charge for the administrator of realm, and the rest will go into general revenue. Now, even at a high number of estimated, we're probably between $10,000-$20,000 at the fees that we're suggesting. So it wouldn't be a significant amount of money, although we haven't made a specific request at this time to redirect those funds. Are the restrictions to eligibility with regard to residents, non-residents rather? No, there will be no restrictions initially. Our initial approach is not to apply restrictions. We also share agreements with other provinces that deal with under what circumstances we really could restrict others or business and things with interprovincially. So we do take those things into consideration. And so there are currently in the initial approach no restrictions for non-residents. A prerequisite of holding an angling guide license will be that you are able to obtain and you do in fact hold a sport fishing license. So that is part of it. And your guide license does not cover personal angling. In fact, it'll be a prerequisite of the guide license, angling guide license, is that you aren't ineligible for a sport fishing license. In terms of insurance, etc., liability, again, as I mentioned in the presentation, the initial approach is really just to take a look at what guiding activities are occurring on the landscape, provide a relatively easily accessed and affordable license, and to have some reporting so that we get a much better sense of what's going on in the province relative to guiding, and that helps guide the direction forward for regulating that guiding in Alberta. The number of guide licenses being made public, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I don't see why we couldn't, but it would be something that I can't answer off the top of my head. So something like we could certainly follow up on. And would the guide license apply to fishing schools, clinics, and include on the water instruction? No. The guide license is intended for folks that make money, or there's some remuneration for taking somebody fishing. Things like schools, clinics, those are more managed under what we call a special angling license. We currently issue those throughout Alberta to schools that have angling as part of a curriculum, to other groups within our Alberta parks that hold fishing and how to angle clinics and things like that. So off the top of my head, and I don't know, given just the question and not the full set of circumstances, I would say that no, I don't think the guide license applies. More likely a different type of license, and that being a special sport fishing license. Anybody?
So, yeah. So if you don't mind,
Yeah.
I'm Bill Patterson. I'm work with Fisheries Policy with Shane. Just a few points. I'll try and fill in there. In terms of residency, yeah, you just have to be able to work in Canada. So that's maybe another way of saying it. Will the guide be required to purchase a standard sport fishing license? Yes, that's one way we use to ensure that the person has no outstanding fines regarding illegal fishing activity. What else? What can I? Yeah, I think those are the 2 points I wanted to make, just to build up Shane's answers. Thanks.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Bill and Shane. I know there's a lot of questions there, so thanks for responding to all of those. All right, so our next question here comes from Ian, and Ian is wondering, why don't more lakes open on June 1st to protect the vulnerable fish population that just spawned?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that, Janine.
Michael.
We have spawning closures are kind of complex in that we need two things to happen. One, the fish have to have a high vulnerability on the spawning ground, and we have to have high fishing pressure. When both those things happen at the same time, then just spawning closures make good sense. But just to pick a single date, like June 1st, that doesn't capture the whole complexity of it. Just in the last 5 years, in the lakes we were looking at west of Edmonton, we had ice out and spawning dates as early as the 10th of April all the way to the 17th of May. And every lake can be quite a bit different every year. And we just can't have 200 different spawning closures on 200 lakes changing every year. So it's got to be a trade-off between incredibly complex and updated regulations and something that captures most of the lakes for most of the time. And that seems to be a mid-May closure that allows people to get out and fish on the long weekend. Sometimes that will make vulnerability to the spawning fish a little high, but mostly that protects the spawning fish. And as the lakes get warmer and warmer, and we're seeing that ice out happen earlier and earlier in April into the future, it'll give them even more protection. Thanks, Janine.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So our next question here comes from Kirby, and Kirby is wondering, what direction might you provide Lethbridge College students, of which many are in attendance tonight, welcome everybody, or others who are looking to comment on the surveys, but perhaps feeling that they aren't familiar enough with the proposed changes and the fisheries to give meaningful feedback?
Hi, I can grab that one. Laura McPherson, fish stock assessment biologist here in Edmonton. Hi, Kirby and Lethbridge College students. Thanks for reaching out. And to be honest, Albertans are a diverse group, and so are Alberta anglers. So we want to hear from the whole gamut of anglers. So there's a ton of information on the web on our AAP website or My Wild Alberta. And if you don't get exactly what you need there, absolutely call or email any one of us. And if we're not the right person, we will point you in the direction. We love having conversations with folks. I would say coffee, but that's not really a thing right now. So absolutely reach out, and thanks so much for being engaged stakeholders.
Thanks for that answer. I'd just like to add to it is during I'm Stuart Nadeau. I'm the fisheries manager for the southern region. We also have the Ask an Expert line open for questions and specific questions that folks may want to ask about. We really welcome the students from LCC and hope to hear from you. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Well, also when we're going through our closing slides tonight, we'll provide some additional resources there as well. So lots of opportunities, but thanks for being here this evening. All right, so our next question here comes from Kelly. And Kelly is wondering, you have talked about walleye stalking efforts and the creation of harvest opportunities. Could you provide an update on some of AEP's recent work regarding native trout recovery in the province?
Thank you, Janine. A really good question. I know the province has put quite a bit of effort into our native trout recovery efforts. In the south, we have both bull trout and Westall cutthroat trout. I think one of the best resources that we have is again through the My Wild Alberta website, which identifies the broodstock that are being developed at the in our hatchery program. This is a really exciting time because one of the we're creating a genetic composite of Westall cutthroat trout that'll be suitable to repopulate streams where Westall cutthroat trout no longer exists. Other efforts that we're taking are we're looking at Westall cutthroat trout habitat and trying to put designations on some of those to try and make sure that we're recovering some of those areas that require it. So. And finally, I'll encourage folks to sign up to My Wild Alberta social media page, where we'll be sharing future updates on on native trout recovery. There'll be I know of in the coming months we'll be working with our partners such as Trout Unlimited and Cows and Fish to go to a four-part series on all updating Albertans on native trout recovery efforts in the province. So it's something that we can have that I encourage you to sign up for. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stuart. I'm also just going to drop a link in for folks to our chat here, so you'll be able to see it, but it just provides you with a new website that has been developed on native trout as well. So if you're interested in that, it's a great resource to be able to go and check out.
Thank you, Jenny.
Perfect, thanks, Stuart. Okay, so our next question here comes from Kirby. So Kirby is wondering if we can go into why paid entry competitive fishing events with fewer than 25 anglers are not subject to the competitive angling license. Bill, I can see you talking about you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
Thanks for the question, Kirby and Janine. One of the updates for the competitive fishing event policy was also proposed to reduce the number of competitive fishing events that we have. Previously, we had 4 events, I believe, of varying sizes. We looked at that. We did a jurisdictional scan. The scan came up to be at a threshold between kind of unlicensed and licensed events seemed to be 25 participants. So we thought, hey, let's simplify. And so we've created 2 categories, or proposing 2 categories, one for less than 26 participants. We refer to that as a derby style event, and more than 25 participants will be a competitive style event. And the competitive event is the paid event. Both events, though, have reporting requirements. The competitive event is applied using an online application form, or will be, and the derby event will be more of an online notification form. I hope that helps.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. So there's a couple of questions here that are very lake specific. So I'm not sure if anybody on the panel wants to provide a response. I'll just read them out so that you can see them here. So they're both from Ian, who is wondering why are Touchwood Lakes still not being considered for stocking when it's been closed for 20 years. And every year Touchwood is brought up, but nothing ever changes. And then just another question here about last year, it was mentioned that Pinehurst would be closed for 1 year. Can you confirm if it is opening for walleye this year with slot SHL tag or just open?
Thank you, Janine. I can take this the first, the Pinehurst question. Last Thursday night, the northern portion of the province did their regulation consultation, and Pinehurst wasn't included, so there won't be a regulation change on Pinehurst Lake. The question regarding stocking of walleye at Touchwood. As we bring the stocking tool back into the province, it's important that we use the right tool in the right place. It's interesting, a fishery, I can't speak specific to Touchwood, but as it was mentioned earlier in the update, the Lac St. Anne is in the Saskatchewan River drainage basin. So we're bringing back the walleye stocking program by choosing fisheries within that drainage. This spring, as teams will be out looking for other opportunities in the province where we can take where eggs it's feasible and economical to catch to capture gametes and deliver them to the hatchery. So it'll expand the opportunities. But having said that, stocking isn't always the best answer. Sometimes it's better to allow Mother Nature to do her thing. And like I said, it doesn't take too many successful spawnings to make many more fish than we can do in the hatchery. So it's important that we get it, and when we do stock, we do it appropriately and under the appropriate circumstance. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Stuart. And Ian, if you still have further questions about specific water bodies, please feel free to add those questions into our Ask the Expert function, or you can get in touch with us via email, and we can put you in touch with our fisheries biologists for the region, because we don't have any of them on the call this evening since we covered that last week. So thanks for the questions, though, and thanks, Stuart, for those answers. So next up, we have a question from David, who is wondering, how is it that other trout fishing destinations can manage time of day closures throughout the season on an as needed basis, but Alberta's approach for the bow and ES1 doesn't offer that flexibility?
I'll take the question. I think I did allude to it in a previous answer that I gave. I can't. I don't know what Montana or BC, for example's specific legislation is that can enable that. I can only speak to what Alberta's legislation is. And under Alberta's legislation, it requires a fair bit of briefing and understanding to be able to make a legislative change. So as an example, I, as a senior fisheries biologist, I do not have the ability to change a regulation. I have the ability to make recommendations on what that regulation change might look like, but that has to go up through several levels of briefing until the appropriate signatory, usually the minister or a designate of the minister under the act, is able to make that change. As you might imagine, trying to ensure that we get all of those appropriate briefings to the right folks in a timely manner is not something that can just happen in minutes once we have data produced. Subsequent to that approval, there's an immense amount of communication that needs to occur via email, via different forms of media, to ensure that not only do anglers have the right information, but that they've received it in a manner that's transparent and gives people the ability to say they were reasonably informed. And then our officers also have to be kept abreast of these within season changes, which is also, when you're trying to communicate across a very wide region, that could involve many dozens of officers and their staff that have to receive this information to make sure it's integrated into it. So again, I don't think we can give you a good answer as to why or how Montana, as an example, is able to do it. I can just speak to what our process is currently in Alberta, and those are some of the challenges that we have.
Thank you, Paul, for answering that question, and thank you, David, for the question. We did look at a variety of options that were available to it, and as Paul has indicated, we also looked at what are our legislative levers, what can we actually do quickly, and how can we effectively communicate to anglers. And During Shane's presentation, he indicated we typically will communicate regulations to our fisheries community once a year. That's our model that we're currently operating under. And this was one of our most efficient and effective means in order to implement this protection option during warm water and low flow periods. So thank you for your question.
Great. Thank you, Paul and Stuart. So next up, we have a couple of questions here. One from Randy. With the increased pressure on our limited water bodies, when will recognition of the over 65 population be recognized and a license, be it free or some sort of system to count this important part of the angling community, be implemented so that you can get even better data and a more complete number of anglers? And then a question from Alicia, sorry. Will the province be transparent regarding how the fee from the angling guide license will be used? And is it always beneficial? It is always beneficial for the public to access how these funds will be applied to promote fisheries.
I can take a shot at that, Janine. So with regard to folks over that no longer require an angling license, those over 65, we certainly recognize that that's there's a good number of folks that don't need a license and they do a lot of fishing. Although we haven't really had any, it's a good thought, although I don't really have a real solid answer, because we haven't really looked at developing anything that would require a notification or require some sort of registration at this point. So I think it's a good question and something we take back for discussion and see where it might land. But we don't have anything currently on the books to move on that topic.
Yeah, this is Mike Sullivan. Just to add to that, Shane's right. In the total number of licenses, we don't know how many seniors there are. But on these specific management issues that we have, how many people are at that lake, we get that from the angler effort surveys. And if you're 65 or if you're 14 or if you're 35, you get counted. So we get the information about how many people are at the lake when we need that information. The total number of anglers in Alberta is really useful for long-term trend planning, and that might be useful to get a senior's license. But absolutely, seniors are counted. Kids that don't have licenses are counted, and that has been included in our fisheries management. Just to be clear, where we need the data, we've got it. What Shane is talking about are these really interesting long-term trends, and that's something we should chat about.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. That's a great add-on. I guess I was viewing this more as a process to, something a little bit more formal relative to some sort of registration or things like that. But you're absolutely right. They're counted. There's no difference. If you're counting anglers at a lake, everybody gets counted. So thank you for that. As far as the guide angling license fees, again, I think I spoke to this Ken's question earlier. It's not a significant amount of money. We don't anticipate, but certainly, and right now, those fees would probably go to general revenue. Is what I've been informed by some of our licensing folks, so I guess we certainly could be as transparent as that. I don't know if at some point we make a request for those funds or there's something that we would redirect them to. Certainly, we would be transparent about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Shane. All right, so our next question here comes from Peter, who is wondering, why does it seem there is no direction or appetite to create a classified water system like BC in Alberta?
So it's a really good question, and I wouldn't say that the idea is lost on us or that there's not an appetite. I'd say it's not a tool that we have developed yet. I think there is increasingly a recognition on a lot of southern Alberta water bodies, especially places like the Bow River or East Slope streams, where we're really seeing the effects of overcrowding on our streams. So, if you've ever gone to fish the Livingston, you used to be able to plan your plan your week where you could go fishing on a Wednesday and it probably wouldn't be so bad. But even that's starting to get really hard. The Bow River, we created it in 2006 and saw 173,000 hours. Did it again in 2018, and we're at about 200,000 hours. So angler effort and pressure is increasing. The fish stocks don't have the same corresponding increase. So, you know, that's just resulting in more and more pressure. So I think we're attuned to the idea that we do need to come up with some type of system. You may know it as a classified water system. You know, in our kind of lexicon, we think of it as a way to limit access to a fishery or limited tags. We do have potentially some of the regulatory mechanisms that would let us do that. We have special harvest licenses right now, which limit a person's ability to actually harvest fish in systems. But what we have not taken the step to do yet is to limit participation in a fishery yet. So as we continue to try to get a better understanding of some of our fish numbers in some of these systems, and an increasing recognition that our fisheries are getting busy, I don't want to say that it's inevitable, but we're only able to supply so many fish, and that ability is generally finite. These systems are beyond their capacity to continue to produce more and more and more fish. So we're going to really have to talk about looking at some type of fair system that limits participation in the fishery. We tend to have done that before through seasonal closures, but I think it's gonna, in the future, it may necessitate limiting who can participate in specific fisheries and when.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Paul. And another example in terms of how we've limited is the special harvest licenses for walleye and things like that. But you're absolutely right. It's something that we need to consider in the future for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul and Shane. And Ernest, I just see you have another question here about why don't you have a senior's license, still keep it free, but that way you get a better number of total anglers. So I think Michael had provided a response to that. So just noting that we saw your question there. It was just after Michael had already responded. So next up here, we have a question from Randy and another one from Noni. So why take guide fees and roll it into general revenue? What about fisheries research, the ACA, stocking effort, guide education? General revenue is not the area where we want these fees, no matter how small or large, to go. And then there's just another question here from Noni saying you are missing an opportunity to use the revenue from the guide license for a specific targeted purpose. Then communicate it back to people what you did and how it helped. Anything is better than it being dumped into general revenue.
I can take that, Janine. There's lots of interest in the guide license fees. We can make recommendations. I don't disagree with anything that either Randy or Nani has said, but we can make recommendations, but we don't make the decisions ultimately. I can't. We don't say this money is going here, and that's the. we can look at it. We can look at what we estimate it to be, and then we can make recommendations, which is ultimately what I think we'll do. We just haven't got there yet. We're just not at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shane. So next up here, we have a question from Peter, and this one's a bit of a long one, so bear with me while I read it out. So disallowing fishing between 2 p.m. and 12 a.m. on the Bow River will effectively destroy a primary pastime for a great number of anglers in the Cabray area whom frequently fish in the evenings after work hours and force them to other water bodies. It has become a lifestyle for many fishermen in the city, and to note, for many fishing in the Bow, it is their only escape from reality from their busy life in this oversized, stressful city. This will force all fishermen in Calgary to only fish in the Glenmore Reservoir, as this is the only real fishable non-river water body in the city, excluding private lakes. And they will not have to travel out of the city, which may not be practical or possible for some, such as youth. So what will happen to the Glenmore Reservoir? And will this lake become a dead zone from overfishing, as it is already under pressure, and then be shut down as well?
Yeah, that's really good. It's a really good question, Peter. And if it seems like you know, a lot of these difficult choices come really easy to us, I can assure you they are not easy things that we are grappling with. We have to choose the least bad decisions in some of these things. So I think we really empathize and appreciate. I think many of us ourselves are very avid sports people, and we really enjoy our times participating in these fisheries on our own personal time. I think despite the fact that these are very challenging trade-offs and decisions that we have to wrestle with, we do have to acknowledge that the reality is that some of these systems just are not able to support the level of participation that they have in the past. So, as we deal with these different milestones that come up, I made an example of how our fishing effort increased about 15% over the period of 2006 to 2018 in a survey. Alberta's population growth rate is projected to increase at that same 1.2 or so % rate for the foreseeable future, and has for the past 50 to 100 years. So I think the reality that we're faced with is we will have more and more and more anglers on this landscape with a finite ability to produce those ones. I think we're trying really hard to make sure that we can keep high levels of participation and enjoyment occurring on systems like the bow that are self-sustaining, but we have to consider that there may be other systems that we can direct people to that may essentially help take some of the pressure off of these ones. Now, what will happen when you might say, well, I'm a bow river angler, I'm not going to just go fish stock ponds, or I'm not going to go fish walleye tomorrow. And those end up being individual choices that folks can make. But I think that's about the best I can answer the question for you. But rest assured, these are very challenging questions that we grapple with, and we really do appreciate and empathize with folks that these things are hard on them as well.
Great, thank you, Paul. So our next question comes from Chloe, and Chloe's saying, in regard to the increase in stalking, what are some of the ecosystem impacts in the short and long term from both the fish and increased angling pressure? For this to be based on conservation, there's been rather little discussion around it.
Yeah, I can take that. Thanks, Chloe. Really important question. And our priorities when we manage fish on a provincial basis are conservation first, Indigenous second, sport fishing third. So conservation, even though you might not have been part of the conversation, that is the main conversation we look at before we do any stalking. Are we going to be introducing an invasive species? Are we going to be introducing invasive genes? Are we going to be changing the ecology of the system? Those are certainly high level considerations before we even get to, hey, that's a good idea, let's just throw them somewhere. That never happens. Also, we really look at the native genetics of what we're stalking, and is stalking the answer? Stuart alluded to this earlier and described it fairly well. In many of our lakes, it's not a problem with not enough small fish. It's a problem of the fish aren't living long enough. If the problem is they're not living long enough, adding more babies doesn't solve that problem. So stalking is used where there's no conservation concerns, where it's not going to affect Indigenous fisheries, and where it's the right tool for the right job. So tonight you might have heard discussions about the cool aspects of stalking, but in the background there's a heck of a lot of conversation about do no harm first. Thank you, Chloe.
Great, thank you, Michael. So our next question here comes from Peter. And Peter is saying there's been some discussion recently that the Bow River should be stocked annually with trout of the same genetics as are present to stop the decline in trout populations. What is the feasibility of such supplemental stocking program?
I can answer that question. It's a very common and very logical question. I mean, if we have a fish problem, why don't we just add more fish? And that is something that we are looking at as well. So I think we've been really quick to dismiss fish stocking as a viable strategy to help bolster some of our fisheries. But we're going to look at this in the context of our cumulative effects model, but it's really important to understand there actually is good science out there on this that has been tried in other places. And there's countless examples in not just the Western United States, the Vincent paper, and some of the work that was done just west of town here in southern Alberta. But what they actually found is when they stopped stalking, some of the natural fish populations increased. They're not sure at what all of the mechanisms for that look like. I think they speculated that some of the mechanisms might have been that some of the hatchery raised fish were just not accustomed to the same feeding patterns, and they would displace natural fish from those patterns. So, even if we could get genetics right, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what those fish, how they would interact with wild counterparts. As Mike talked about in his previous answer, a lot of the modeling that we've done on the Bow River and subsequent monitoring that you see us out doing in the fall, we don't tend to have a problem with smaller juvenile fish. We get lots of baby fish. So to us, that's an indication that perhaps the number of recruits coming into the population isn't really the problem, but the ability for them to survive, once they become vulnerable to angling is perhaps one of the issues that we need to look at. But rest assured, we're not just dismissing it outright and saying, well, we wouldn't bother doing that. We have fantastic fish culture facilities and world-class facilities in the province that are capable of doing a lot of this work for us. But what we want to do is make sure that we're not trying to fix something that's not broken. And perhaps worse, adding a risk factor to a system that's already working right now. So we are looking at it, and thank you for the comment.
Great, thanks, Paul. So we just have one final question here before we move into our closing slides, and it comes from David regarding the guide license. What if you're a senior citizen who doesn't require a fishing license?
I can take that. Thanks for the question, David. Basically, when you go into Realm, you'll have a profile in there. It will recognize your age and the fact that you don't require a sport fishing license. So it will provide the option for the guide license for you. So should be hopefully relatively straightforward there. You still will be required to report on any guiding activities, obviously, prior to renewing your guiding license. So that's the proposal right now.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Shane. All right. So that brings us to the end of our question and answer section there. So I am just going to take us through a couple of closing slides here. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us for this evening. As mentioned, we do have that consultation, that item that we're looking for feedback on, as well as numerous water bodies that were presented at webinars last week. So if you haven't filled out the survey yet, please go ahead and fill that out. It is open until February 7th, so lots of time. We also referenced several times this evening about our Ask the Expert. So that is a tool that is open for you to be able to go and submit any questions that we didn't get to this evening. And you can also actually read responses to other people's questions as well. So we've had a couple of questions come through that we're starting to respond, and throughout the course of the engagement, there will be a great set of information that's on there. And then just a reminder that we do have fact sheets available for each of the consultation and notification items as discussed here this evening and in our other webinars. So in terms of staying engaged with us throughout the rest of the year, if you're not familiar with us on YouTube, we do post all of these webinars there. So a recording of this will be posted tomorrow morning. And you can also actually see a bunch of different previous webinars and also educational videos on there. So it's a great place to go if you're looking for sessions that you weren't able to attend to be able to view them. And then just a couple of other great things to keep in mind. It is the Family Fishing Weekend coming up. So a great opportunity to share the great sport that we all know and love with people who do not need a sport fishing license. So of course, all regulations still apply, but a great opportunity to get people out ice fishing. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, that's another great place to stay engaged. And we'll be posting a bunch of information on there around the Family Fishing Weekend as well. And Shane had mentioned several times in the presentation about upcoming reports. So those will be posted on our websites. My Wild Alberta is more focused on things that anglers need to know today and now in order to be able to go fishing, where more of our policy documents live on alberta.ca, but a quick Google search should get you to where you need to go. And after our session this evening, you will be directed to go into a survey. So we would love to hear your feedback on tonight's session. As Shane mentioned in his presentation, we do these sessions every year to hear your feedback on sport fishing regulations and the engagement in general. And we'd love to hear your feedback on the session so that we can continue to improve them in the future. So with that, folks, I'd really like to thank you again for spending your evening with us. And we look forward to engaging with you more in the future. If you have follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, as we are more than happy to stay in touch throughout the year and not just when our engagement is happening. So with that, we'll close the meeting tonight and have a great